First, my name is Bert Groot. We initiated this little meetup in Eindhoven with a group of people. So first I would like to thank Roy for initiating this, Ramon and some other people who have been involved with arranging this. And then we have Jeffrey and Stijn at the camera and made this all possible. So first I'm going to introduce Aaron. And of course we have an official introduction, which is just at the end of the book, about the author. So what I did is I printed the book already, and I'll read out loud what he probably described himself as.
Yes.
Aaron van Wirdum studied journalism at the University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht and politics and society in historical perspective at Utrecht University, where he adopted the focus on the historic influence of new technologies on societal structures. He discovered Bitcoin in 2013 and has been writing about the world's first successful electronic cash project ever since. For most of these years, this was for Bitcoin magazine, first as journalist, then as technical editor, and finally as editor-in-chief of the print edition. The Genesis book is his first book. That's the official introduction. And then, of course, I have an unofficial introduction.
All right.
Also,
let's have it.
Let's have it. I don't know Aaron that long because I'm not into the Bitcoin industry for that long, but this is the first public picture of Aaron that we know of. So, for everyone to see, this is Aaron. Do you remember when this was, Aaron?
Yeah, that's Bitcoin Arnhem City. I think it was probably the lunch party of Bitcoin Arnhem Bitcoin City. I would guess. I think they had like a tour, like a bar tour. A kroegentocht would be the Dutch term, and I mean I don't remember that. I don't know what I'm clapping for in the picture. Probably Patrick announcing something, or yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what year it approximately was?
2014.
Yeah, it's 2014. So I asked Patrick to send me this picture so we can see a bit more. And actually, which is not in the official introduction, is this. I printed it so we can all see it. This was your work back then.
Yeah, I had a Dutch news site called courant. Even before that, I had a Dutch blog for a little while called Bankless Blog, where I started blogging about Bitcoin. And then after a couple of months, this sort of transforms into a news site, which I called courant, which I launched with a friend called Arjan Nuiten. So for about a year, I did news about Bitcoin, and especially sort of a focus on Bitcoin in the Netherlands, but also international news. So like the Bitcoin, the Arnhem Bitcoin City project and stuff like that. I was writing about that.
Yeah. So I have here in front of me. It's the 13th of February in 2015, where you wrote, "I'm quitting courant." So this is the Dutch online newspaper that you were writing in, because you were basically too busy with CoinDesk, Cointelegraph, Bitcoin Magazine, and Bitpost for the international news that was that you were writing for. And because if I want to do something, it's explicitly here, if I want to do something, I want to do it properly. I want to do it the right way, and not halfway. So not the correct way.
No, half-baked.
Yeah, exactly. You wanted to do it properly. So I will stop with courant because I'm too busy on the international stage. And this was in 2015. And the nice thing was that Patrick van der Meijden, who was here the last meetup, wrote a comment, and there were 4 comments on this webpage. So I could find this back in the web archive. And he wrote, "This is very sad to see you leave in the Dutch media space, because you wrote the best Dutch articles that existed about Bitcoin." And my favorite article was about the Dutch police using Bitcoin to buy weapons. So of course I had to check this out because this was really funny. I laughed a lot and almost made me cry of laughter because you wrote a cynical article about the police ordering weapons with Bitcoin. And I don't know if you remember anything.
I don't remember this.
Okay, so this is really amazing. So this is around 2014, and this is about. I want to highlight a couple of passages in this article because it's so funny.
Oh boy.
And what you speak about is that probably an anonymous Mesopotamian or Egyptian has actually made it possible to physically send packages across the globe. And it's very strange that this letter secret that exists, so people cannot open packages who are sending packages across the globe, are actually able to send these weapons. And actually, what is very strange is, for our online traffic, this secret of transformation of whatever we put in packages is not at all being present. So online, our security companies, as well in the Netherlands as in the US, are actually tracking everything that we send across the internet. So it's very strange that these digital communication systems are actually being tracked and that they use Bitcoin for buying weapons. Why they could have just used cash, because if they would have put cash in an envelope, it would have been into the letter secret.
Right.
So the strange thing is that in this cynical article, you come back that it's very strange to see that the entire media landscape in the Netherlands is pushing this police bought weapons with Bitcoin articles, all parallel at the same time in 2014, while actually everyone could have done this with cash. And actually, maybe this is really nice. Maybe they should start investigating all these postages, or actually the internet by itself, because it might be used by criminals at all. And I would really advise you to read this back, because it's really funny to see how indeed already for more than 10 years the media is scrutinizing Bitcoin a lot, while there is traceability on the internet already. So you better use cash if you want to do something illegal. So
yeah, so I was addressing the double standards that media and politicians have for something like Bitcoin, while Bitcoin actually offers the rights that we all fought for hundreds of years and that everyone finds normal. That was kind of the joke, I guess.
Yeah, and what is nice is that if you go into this book, you will read this back.
Right.
And I think that's where I want to start with. So first there will be some personal questions and then we dive a bit into the book. Mm-hmm. But of course the standard question you always get is, how did you find Bitcoin? Because you were really early.
Yeah, I found Bitcoin because I was living in a student dorm at the time, and so flatmates of mine were buying stuff from the Silk Road. And I was starting out as a journalist, and I was looking for interesting stories, essentially, like, you know, open mind, open vizier, how do you say that in English? I was just looking for interesting stuff to write about. And then these friends of mine were buying stuff from the Silk Road, and I thought, that sounds pretty interesting. That's new. That's a new thing. Let's see if I can write an article about this. So I started to look more into it, started to ask them more questions, and that's how I found this website was using this new type of currency, this, you know, different type of currency. And when I realized that this new type of currency it wasn't just PayPal but anonymous, but it was actually, there was this idea behind it, like a monetary reform idea. I remember for the first time reading Satoshi's first sentence in the Genesis block, right? Chancellor on the brink of bailouts for banks, second bailout for banks. And I remember jumping out of my chair, like, what is going on here? This is really, there's a real idea behind this. And I got really fascinated by Bitcoin more so than Silk Road. like Silk Road, I still think today is an interesting concept, but Bitcoin is way bigger than that, and that's how my journey into the rabbit hole started. And yeah, after a couple of months, I decided this is such a big idea. This is so interesting. If this succeeds, it could have such a profound impact on the world that I want to be there for it, and I want to start writing about this. So that's why I started the blog at first, and the news site after that. That's how it all started. It started with the Silk Road. Free Ross.
Yeah, so this book came out basically 10 years after you found Bitcoin.
Almost exactly. It came out almost exactly 10 years after my first blog post about Bitcoin. So that was like October 2013. And the book, so I had a limited edition before this, which was also published in October this year. Last year. We're in the new year now, so October 2023. So almost 10 years. It took me to write my first book.
Yeah. And then, how come this still interests you? Because 10 years, then why don't you let go at some point?
Why don't I just fuck off? I think it's still, I still feel the same way. Sure, like the initial sort of spark of excitement and interest that will wane over time, but I still think money is such an important tool for all of society, for humanity. It's how we organize ourselves. It's even more important than politics. It's, politicians have to figure out how to spend the money, but who creates the money, that's a bigger question even. So it's, one of the most fundamental questions of how do you organize society is how does the money work? And I think that still today the question is as relevant as it was 10 years ago. Also, Bitcoin hasn't reached mainstream adoption yet, so it's still a project in process. So, I'm not planning on leaving until we get there.
Okay.
I might change my mind. Don't make me sign a contract. But for now, yes, I still think Bitcoin is the most interesting and important technology to spend my time and focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, so you went to search for the basis of Bitcoin in this book, what made Bitcoin happen in that sense. And then you were able to interview a lot of cypherpunks and anonymous people, actually, that you don't see anywhere in public. So how did you achieve this?
Most of them are not anonymous. Is that the word you mean? Because I don't think so. I interviewed most people in my book. I definitely reached out to everyone who was still alive, which is not everyone, of course. Finney is not around. Hayek is a big part of the book. He's not around. But I would say, Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Wide-Eye, they're all none of them are anonymous. Mm-hmm. Eric Hughes, I spoke with. Well, actually, Eric Hughes was a bit complicated. Whitfield Diffie, though, David Chaum, but yeah, they're not anonymous, though.
So how did you reach out to them? Is there a public email then where you can reach them?
Some of them have public email. Some of them I just know, like Adam Back, I've known for a long time. Nick Szabo, I've met a couple of times. But yeah, it's whatever way was possible. Sometimes I had a connection through someone. Mm-hmm. Some of them just have a website with an email address on them. Some of them, let's see, like Wide-Eye has a public email address, I think, which he doesn't respond to usually, but in the end, I got a response from him as well. So yeah, it really differs. I in my peak of desperation, I even use LinkedIn sometimes to try to reach out to some people. I don't know if that was any success though. I'm sort of thinking out loud here. But most people that I wanted to reach, I found some sort of contact info one way or another, if I didn't already know them. So yeah.
Okay.
I spoke with most people in my book, I would say. Or at least a lot of people read the chapter and gave me feedback in that sense. Like I didn't meet everyone in person, that's for sure. Or even a phone call, but email contact and that kind of stuff, yeah.
Because there is no mailing list anymore, right?
I'm actually not sure what happens. I mean, it's at least like in every practical sense of the word defunct, but there might technically still be a cypherpunk mailing list that you could reach. Also, I reached out to Satoshi Nakamoto, of course, but he did not respond. In fact, his... Why are you laughing? He could have. No, actually he couldn't have, because his email's now bounced. Like the known email addresses of his are defunct apparently nowadays. So no response from Satoshi, or at least not under the, maybe I spoke to Satoshi, who knows, but not under the Satoshi pseudonym.
Yeah.
That's one of the few people who just completely ignored me.
And then, the question is, if you look at the book itself, it took you 6 years to write it?
I mean, I decided to write it like early 2018, so January 2018 basically. I started to really take this idea seriously, and now it's 6 years later, so you could say 6 years. I mean, I did other stuff in the meantime, and the first half year or so wasn't writing a book, and also the last half year was... Anyway, so yeah, something like that. So it was a lot of work. I took a good chunk of time to research it all, reach out to the people that I wanted to reach out to, do background research, other books that are good, that are on similar topics. I spent a lot of time reading the mailing, the cypherpunks mailing list archives, for example, like reading through all of these threads of these guys that were, thinking of creating digital cash and the types of discussions they were having about that, which, like how do we do that and should it be backed? And there's very interesting threads on the cypherpunks mailing list that you really can sort of follow the thought process of these guys and how they sort of slowly come to the realization, at least some of them, that maybe actually digital cash doesn't need to be backed, like it can just be its own thing, like Bitcoin is. I spent a lot of time doing that. There's extropian magazines, which is a part of the book. It's about 5-6 years of research and writing altogether.
Okay, that's quite a lot of work. And most of this you did from the Netherlands, eh? You live in the Netherlands?
Most of it, yes, but I think I started in Italy, and then the first year and a half or so I was living in Barcelona. So it's an international book. But most of it I did in the Netherlands, yes.
But then if you look at what I currently hear a lot, also a lot of people who are around here, they are thinking of maybe moving out of the Netherlands when there's too much regulation coming in with Bitcoin. What is your plan?
Good question. I'm not sure yet. I just finished my book, and sort of my whole life planning sort of schedule sort of ended here, so I gotta figure it out. I really like the Netherlands, but I've lived in different places, and I might decide to go somewhere else for a while again. I could see myself do that, but I don't have a concrete plan right now.
Okay.
For now I'm in the Netherlands. Yeah,
so today then Bitcoin exists 15 years and 2 days today. And if you can take a look at what is going to happen, how do you see the next 15 years unfold?
I think there will be a lot of... I don't think Bitcoin will sort of reach mass adoption, hyper-Bitcoinization, whatever you want to call it. I never ever thought that would be a smooth ride. I think there will be a lot of pushback eventually, basically tying into that cynical article I wrote. I think a lot of policymakers, politicians, or just people in general in the streets, they'll be very scared about this idea. They'll be very worried about this idea, and we'll see regulation increase a lot. I think this will be a true fight in the same way that, as one of the things I write about in my book, the crypto wars in the 90s, that was a real fight, right? So in the 90s, for those that don't know yet, because you haven't read my book yet, in the 90s there was a real pushback against cryptography. So cryptography was invented, at least public key cryptography was invented in the 70s. And then in the 90s, it started being adopted, for example, by the cypherpunks, but also by bigger companies. The Netscapes of these, Netscape specifically, for example, they were starting to implement these tools. And in the United States in particular, the authorities were very concerned about this, so they started to regulate this to very significant extents. So, for example, it was illegal to export cryptography out of the United States. This is why Adam Back, for example, at some point printed the RSA algorithm on a T-shirt. So then if an American would wear this T-shirt and leave the United States, he was technically a weapons exporter, because that's the rule he was breaking. He was breaking weapon export rules. So he did that to sort of make a statement about how ridiculous these rules were. And the cypherpunks, shortly after they were founded, which was 92, these rules came into effect and they started to really fight back against this. So they start to, for one, just create these tools, like regardless of what the rules were, as open source software, free and open source software. And they were trying to rally, activists and human rights groups, and they were trying to explain it to, the normies, so to say, why encryption was important and normal. But this was a real fight. Like, it was really uncertain where cryptography would go. Like, it was really not obvious that cryptography would be this thing that people nowadays just have in their phone on WhatsApp or Signal. Like, it's a normal thing. You're allowed to have anonymous communication. So this was far from obvious in the 90s, and it really took a concerted effort from, for one, industry, like companies like Netscape, as I mentioned, that were realizing that it was harming their profits because it wasn't as easy to sell their software abroad. Human rights groups like the ACLU and the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they start to raise their concerns with these kinds of regulations. And then you had the cypherpunks as sort of the radical group there that said, we don't give a fuck what your regulations are, we're just gonna do it regardless. And I do think in Bitcoin we're gonna see something like that. Like right now, the KYC, AML stuff, it's increasing to very worrisome levels, and we'll probably see even more of that. Like they'll probably try to apply that to miners and every exchange, and it's going to be harder and harder to just use Bitcoin as money because of all these regulations. And I think that's something that Bitcoiners today can sort of learn from the cypherpunk history, is that if you want to prevent that, you got to explain why privacy is normal, why it's a right we have, and it's going to take this concerted effort of both radicals and industry and human rights groups to sort of collaborate on, we need to stop this. It needs to be understood by policymakers that we should just be able to pay each other normally, like we did with cash, as I wrote in that article. Like, it should be a normal thing. We shouldn't have to feel like criminals when we use something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, and exactly as you say, this storyline is very much put into words of all the people you interviewed in the book. And you have not read the book, but I read the book twice. So I'm going to put some quotes out there so people have a little bit of a sneak peek into the book. And what you started with, and that's a quote I personally also like a lot,
right,
is the quote of Friedrich Hayek in 1984. How coincidental that 1984 is, but I don't believe that we shall ever have a good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government. Since we can't take them violently out of the hands of government, all we can do is, by some sly roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop. And exactly this is what you were just explaining. And do you still see, with these increased regulations you were just explaining, that Bitcoin will still be used in this sly roundabout way to actually go around governments?
Yeah, so first of all, about this quote, I chose this as the opening quote for my book because it's really the essence of my book. You read it, right? So the book is for a big part about Hayek himself, because I think Hayek's ideas about money are the most relevant to Bitcoin out of any economist out there for several reasons. So for one, in the 30s, he had this big debate with Keynes about monetary policy. And at some point, Hayek described what he believed would be the ideal form of money. And what he described as the ideal form of money would be a money that has a limited supply, fungible, can be used anywhere in the world. So basically he was describing Bitcoin. The problem at that point was that he thought it was impossible. He thought this would be ideal, but there's no way to do this. So why is there no way to do this? It's because you would need a financial institution or a monetary institution that's recognized all around the world, and it can't be corrupted by anyone. So even in worst case scenario of like a war, let's say an institution like this is based in Switzerland or in the United States, like at some point pressure will mount to an extent that a limited supply will come under pressure and they'll just have to fold. There's no place in the world, there's no way to create an institution that will actually enforce this. So he gave up on this idea and he sort of settled for gold as like, let's just go with gold then, because this ideal is not possible. And then later in his life, he sort of shifted his perspective and he said, you know what's actually better than that? Is to leave it to the free market. Let's let the free market decide what is the best form of money. And at this time, this was a very new and pretty radical idea. But even then, his idea to achieve this was we need to convince governments that this should be allowed. So the same governments that benefit so much from controlling the money printer, that's the people we need to convince that they shouldn't have that benefit, and we should all be able to create money as we want, like the free market should decide. Right, and then he kind of came to the conclusion, well, that's probably not going to happen because the governments benefit too much. And that's why in the 90s, so a little bit later even, that's sort of when he shifted his perspective again, and he said, we just need to do it in a way they can't stop. Like that's really the only solution here. And then the other big part of the book is about the invention of cryptography and the emergence of the hacker movement and the more the technological branch of the story. And these guys from the very get-go had this philosophy of we're gonna create stuff that governments can't stop. So these two movements, the reforming money movement and the creating technology that governments can't stop movement, they really got merged through the cypherpunks, and that eventually led to Bitcoin, I'd say. Yeah. So that's why I chose that as the opening quote in the book. Now I don't remember what your actual question was. I just went on a rant about the opening quote.
And it's very nice because I will come to a couple of these points, so you can maybe elaborate a bit further on this. So the first question then is, the extropian movement is a big part of this, what you're just explaining. So what is the extropian movement? Because there will be people who don't even know what it is.
Yeah. So the extropian movement, this was started by Max O'Connor, who changed his name to Max Moore, and his friend Tom Bell, who changed his name to Tomorrow. So there's like a nice ring to their new names, right? It's Max Moore and Tomorrow. And they had this idea that technology could really reshape society. And not just society, but really humanity itself, actually. So they had this vision of technological progress being able to cure diseases, any disease, but also cure aging. So at that point, lifespans become indefinite. So at that point, if we're going to live forever, like through technology, and technology is also going to enable us to colonize the universe, and we're going to be able to clone ourselves, and we're going to be able to upload our brains, and we're going to have AI, and we're going to have all of these futurist ideas that's going to completely reshape humanity itself. It's going to create a new species, even, like essentially. We're going to replace our eyes with bionic eyes, to improve our eyesight, and you can name it, and technology is going to enable it. So this was sort of this was the extropian vision. As mentioned, it was started by Max Moore and Tomorrow, and they launched a magazine where they would start discussing these ideas. And this magazine was read. It was a movement based in California, and this magazine was read by a pretty wide range of scientists and smart people, just as a shorthand. This also included like computer scientists or rocket scientists or they were all getting very interested in these ideas and taking them seriously, importantly. Like, it wasn't science fiction, it was like real. It was a real thing they wanted to achieve, and some things have been achieved. You know, AI is getting pretty far at this point, for example. You know, remember, this is like the 90s where this was still complete fantasy, essentially. So they created this magazine, and importantly, one of the factors of like how they wanted to achieve this, like these visions existed, for example, in Star Trek as well. But in Star Trek, there's this all-knowing, wise, maleficent world government that's sort of shepherding humanity in the right direction. And their idea was, no, that's not the good vision for the future. The right vision for the future is to take a more Hayekian approach. So they were very inspired by Hayek, and they believed that if you organize society among Hayekian principles, then you can actually achieve this future. So what that means is basically limit the role of government, let the free market reign free, let people experiment and explore and try out new technologies, and that's how we're gonna realize this future society. Now, one of the extropians was Finney. He was part of that group. He was very excited about all of these ideas, and he at some point learned about digital cash. So David Chaum had his digital cash startup in Amsterdam, by the way, in the Netherlands. And Finney learned about this, and he recognized that this was a way for people to pay each other over the internet without the government being involved. Now remember, the extropians wanted to remove the government from their lives as much as possible. So this idea really resonated with Finney as a way to pay each other anonymously, like let's get a government out of our lives. So he started to push this idea, he started to promote this idea to his fellow extropians, like Max More, who was the founder of the movement. But then some of these other extropians, they heard about this idea, and they kind of realized this is even bigger than how Finney thinks. This has even more potential. So yes, we can create anonymous transactions and keep the government out of our lives in that way, but we can also realize Hayek's idea for free market money through the same technology. So Max More started to propose this idea that we can use digital cash to also create free market money. And that's how these ideas sort of got merged. And then from the extropian movement, a number of these guys, like Tim May, they formed the cypherpunk movement. So Tim May was an extropian, he had a friend, Eric Hughes, who was a hacker, and they met and they started to discuss the potential for cryptography, and they came to the conclusion that these ideas that mostly existed in academia are very interesting, but no one's using it. We got to make sure that people start using this. So they founded the cypherpunks, and then Tim May brought a bunch of his extropian friends with him to the cypherpunk movement. So this includes some people that everyone, or some names that most people will recognize, like Nick Szabo, Finney, Wide-Eye, like people that really, you know, the godfathers of the digital cash movement, as also described in my book, of course.
And then if you look at the extropians, many also believe that they can be brought back to life, so they freeze themselves.
Right.
So Finney is in cryo, as they call it.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Are you going to freeze yourself?
Well, you need to sign up, and I haven't signed up yet.
Are you planning to?
Well, let me first give some context for people that don't know about it. So yes, the idea is, technology is about this extropian narrative, right? Or this what I think or believe. So technology, medical technology, is about to cure all diseases and old age. So soon, within a couple of decades, you know, it's a rough estimate, then people will be able to live forever. You won't have to die. There won't be any dying of disease or old age anyways. Now, that really sucks if you die now, because then you miss the window by only a couple of decades, right? Like, it's the difference between living until, you know, whatever age you are, or living forever and colonizing space and, you know, having all of these extropian pleasures and this new world, and it's only a couple of decades off. So yeah, as a sort of temporary solution, they came up with this idea to cryopreserve, what's the English, struggling with the actual term. But yeah, freeze your body. Let's just say it like that, freeze your body, or just your head, because you can upload your brain anyways, or you can get a whole bionic body. Yeah. Why are you laughing?
Literally in the book, that there's apparently more than 1,000 people that are actually frozen at the moment, either their heads or their entire body. So because they believe that within.
Yeah. So the idea is that the technology will improve to the point where these people can be, defrosted and brought to. Well, defrosting is easy. We can do that now, but bring them back
to life.
Yeah, bring them back to life and cure whatever diseases they were suffering from, and then you still got that extropian future. Now, will I do it? Here's the case for doing it. If you die right now without having your body frozen, then 100% certainly you're not coming back. If you have yourself frozen, like what's the odds of coming back? Is it like 0.000000001? Is it like it's bigger than zero, right? Don't you think? Like there's at least some chance. So what do you have to lose? You have nothing to lose, right?
And then how do you
either you're dead or you're maybe dead.
Yeah, but how do you pay for it with this hyperinflation?
Well, I think you need to have a bounty. So you need to have a brain wallet, and then you say whoever brings me back to life gets 50%. So.
Exactly. So I want to read a quote of David Chaum, because that struck me a little bit in the book. A society with or without anonymous transactions would ultimately mean the difference between democracy and dictatorship, Chaum believed. What was needed, he therefore concluded, was a type of digital money that offered users a similar level of privacy as physical cash. The world needed electronic cash. Do you believe that we already live in a dictatorship here?
No. I don't. I mean, there are real dictatorships that are way worse than what we have here. There's work to be done, but no, I would definitely rather live here than North Korea or.
Do you think?
Is that not the answer you were looking for?
Yes. No, but there are people that actually say, okay, we have come this far that we mostly use electronic cash, so the majority of people use electronic cash here in the Netherlands, and this means that this is fully in control of the government, and by this, actually, if you are not conforming with the government, your bank account is frozen and you're done.
Yeah.
So we basically already live in a dictatorship. That's what some people believe at the moment. So
I mean, it's a sliding scale, and we're definitely heading more in that direction. Another good example would, for example, be Hong Kong, right? Where at the time of the Hong Kong protests, there were protests against Hong Kong being
submerged.
That's not the word I'm looking for.
Subverted.
Anyways, becoming part of China, right? Losing their sovereignty, essentially. And there were protests against that. And at that point, the protesters that went to these protests, to go there and to go back, they had to take the subway. Now, if you can only pay electronically to go on the subway, like this is a real world example, then the CCP knows exactly who was there and they could target these people. So this is a, actually example of the last couple of years why you might want to have privacy of payments if you care about democracy, if you want to fight for democracy, if that's the type of stuff you care about. But more generally, privacy allows people to be themselves and to be their true selves, which is, obviously important. If everything you do is always monitored, is always looked at, potentially by a government that doesn't want the best for you or that wants you to just comply, then you're going to change your behavior. And that's sort of the real danger. That's the real risk here. That's how you slip into more and more totalitarian worlds, and so privacy for that reason is fundamental, and that includes privacy of payments and of money transactions.
Yeah, so then we come to the next quote, which is of Tim May, about this government control, which is a nice bridge then. If the government creates this cashless society, then the government will have unprecedented control over nearly all of the aspects of our lives. And that's something that Tim May wrote on the cypherpunk list. And then...
I mean, keep in mind, maybe an even more obvious example than what I just gave is, if you can cut off the finances of a dissident, if you can make sure that whoever doesn't agree with your totalitarian policies can't pay rent, they can't pay food, they're just cut off from society. It's such a powerful tool that it's really dangerous to leave that tool in the hands of any centralized authority. It really can lead to a totalitarian 1984-ish government that I don't think anyone wants to live under.
Yeah, and then the text quote, which is even more nice from Tim May, is he may argues that a notable segment of the economy successfully and consistently escaped taxes. A change in public sentiment would eventually trigger a much bigger challenge. The effect will be an erosion of support for taxation. As word spreads that many consultants, writers, information sellers and the like are sheltering much of their income via use of networks and strong cryptography, May wrote, the tax system is already shaky. 5 trillion national debt growing every year, and it may not take much of a push to trigger a phase change, a total tax revolt. And if you then look in the lights now in the Netherlands, where what I've read that thousands and thousands of people are at the moment refusing to pay tax with the return to sender movement in the Netherlands, in the end, what we will see is that these people will get their bank accounts frozen or blocked, and they will end up in jail because they're fully traceable and they are using bank money at the moment. So how come that these people have still not found Bitcoin if they want to do this?
Or maybe they have, right? And we wouldn't know. Like that's, if they're smart.
That's a good one.
Also, to give a little bit of context to that quote, so the cypherpunks essentially, you could say there was sort of a radical version of the cypherpunks.
I'm coming to this. Exactly this.
Okay.
So the nice thing is this is like the radical part of the movement, of the cypherpunk, but you also have finney, which is totally different. And then this quote fits so well with that he says, fundamentally, I believe we will have the kind of society that most people want. If we want freedom and if we want privacy, we must persuade others that these are worth having. There are no shortcuts. Withdrawing into technology is like pulling the blankets over your head. It feels good for a while until reality catches up. So Finney really says that we have to make sure that people understand that we have Bitcoin as a tool, that we can use this. And that's the less radical way.
And also why things like privacy are normal and important. Yep. Like it's, so these are sort of, you could see, especially I guess, Tim May and Finney as sort of the opposite kind of forces within the cypherpunk movement, where Tim May holds this sort of radical idea that if we have tools like this, we can completely undermine the state and we can bring the state down. And the idea from the quote that you just read is, if a significant amount of people just refuse to pay tax and also can refuse to pay tax, like they can just hide their income, then it will discourage, it will sort of undermine the willingness of everyone else also to pay tax. And that's how you bring down the state. Finney has this more, moderate, he wasn't necessarily moderate, more realistic approach maybe, that no, society would look like what most people want society to look like. So if we want a more libertarian society, or if we want privacy in transactions to be a normal thing, there are no shortcuts. We need to explain to people why this is something we should all have, why it's a normal thing. So while Tim May had this idea that the technology we just need to have this technology and then it will just sort of solve itself, then we'll get to this libertarian society. Finney, although he kind of wanted the same thing, said no, it's not going to work like that. We actually have to put in the hard work of trying to explain to people why this is a good thing.
Yeah. Is this what you want to achieve with your book?
No, not really. What I want to achieve with my book is that people understand Bitcoin itself, understand where it came from. I do consider myself, if that's your question, kind of a Finney-ish, ideologically I'm sort of aligned with Finney. I believe in free markets. I believe in small government. I think, that's a good thing to have in general, and I believe the way to get there is to convince people that it's a good thing to have that. I wouldn't say that was the goal of writing the book. The goal of writing the book was to explain Bitcoin. I am a historian, and the reason I wanted to become a historian is because I believe if you want to understand why things are the way they are today, you got to understand where they came from. And that was my same mode of thought for writing this book. I want to know where this thing came from. And the way I wrote the book also tries to explain that in a sort of very step-for-step way. So there was this one step of, public key, cryptography was invented, open source free software was invented, and then this guy started, and it's this very step-for-step way of understanding why Bitcoin was designed the way it was, why it exists, and why it's important. That was the goal. I don't think people necessarily, even today, I don't think people necessarily need to agree with these cypherpunk ideologies to care about Bitcoin. I think you probably should care about privacy of transactions and limited supply of money. That's pretty fundamental. But you can be a socialist and still like Bitcoin. There's no fundamental difference there. I think it's a lot harder to realize because you have to actually be honest to people about what you're doing rather than, secretly print money. But hey, it's possible. So no, I wouldn't say that was the goal for me. The goal was to explain Bitcoin from a historical perspective.
Yeah. And then there's actually a nice...
Although I do explain why socialism doesn't work in the book, yeah.
That's true. I think most people agree that are here. And then there's an interesting part which I thought about a lot because in the 90s they were already working on this digital cash system, and at that moment Nick Szabo had eCash at that very time, and it was patented.
Yes.
And it was really interesting because at the cypherpunk mailing list, a third option was proposed by an anonymous mailing list contributor who came up with a scheme where the seller was involved with the initial creation of the eCash, where in the original eCash protocol, only the buyer and the bank are involved with the generation of these keys. Could this have been Satoshi already?
There's many people in the book that could technically or potentially have been Satoshi. I do think, definitely during my research, I realized, in reading the cypherpunks mailing list and these kinds of things, I realized that there were quite a few people thinking about these topics and thinking in this general direction that would have been aware of most of the tools and most of the insights Satoshi had. So there's really a longer list than I thought of people that could have been Satoshi, and that's just people I encountered. Obviously there could be some 16-year-old kid that I've never heard of that just read the same stuff I read and started thinking about it as well. So yeah, I mean, this could have been Satoshi, sure. There's quite a few people that could have been. It's not a topic I address in my book. I steer clear of trying to figure out who Satoshi was. I find it very likely that he was on the cypherpunks mailing list. Just the way he was thinking, just this type of stuff that he was you know, he really did seem inspired by these prior technologies, and something like BitGold. There's so many similarities to how Bitcoin works that I would be quite shocked if Satoshi wasn't aware of these things. I really think he was, and at some point he at least said as much on the Bitcoin Talk forum that Bitcoin was an implementation of BitGold and White Ice B money. So yeah, I mean, I think he was probably one of the cypherpunks, but I have no idea.
Yeah.
Who, of course.
Yeah, and about Nakamoto you wrote, on top of that, his timing was impeccable too. Just as central banks across the world were deploying unprecedented interventions across the financial system in desperate attempts to prevent a full-blown economic collapse, Satoshi Nakamoto proposed a new type of money that could operate without financial institutions altogether, a digital currency system based entirely on math. Yet, most of the initial responses to Bitcoin's public announcement failed to recognize or appreciate the significance of his breakthrough. And I still feel that we are a bit into that. Because we are here with approximately 50 people, and we're still at the forefront of Bitcoin. So how do you feel that after 15 years, and you've been here for more than a decade, that it's still such a small group?
I mean, it's a lot bigger than it was 10 years ago. You know, you say there's 50 people, I don't know, maybe I would say maybe a bit more, and that's in Eindhoven.
Yeah?
Who lives in Eindhoven? I'm joking. Yeah. But, but there's, I mean, if there's 50 people in every city, that's a lot more, like 50 people, 10 years ago there's 50 people in the whole country. So, you know, we're definitely growing, it's going in the right direction. I would say it's growing pretty fast, actually. Like Bitcoin started with one guy. 15 years ago, and then it became 2, and then it became 4, and now there's quite a lot of people. And if we keep growing at this pace, then we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm not in a rush. Are you in a rush?
I'm not in a rush.
I think definitely. We're doing well.
Yeah, and then it's really fun to go back to that article about the police, where you actually compare the internet and exactly the media coverage of the internet back in the days, because back in the days the internet was only used by criminals, and it was exactly the same media coverage as we see with Bitcoin over the past years and still ongoing. And you are basically already saying that maybe it's just a technology that might be used by criminals, but there will be a lot more people benefiting from it in the future. So you still believe that this is the path that it will move through as being the internet?
I mean, criminals are often creative people, right? They're looking for new solutions. They're looking for new tricks to figure out. So it's not that strange that criminals are the first to adopt a new technology. I think there's pretty good precedent for that happening with earlier. I mean, the internet is a good example. Like early on, I think you know, there were a lot of scams, a lot of porn, porn is legal, but. But yeah, no, I mean, I think new technologies have a tendency to start at the fringe, and then they slowly become more mainstream, and I think Bitcoin is already getting pretty mainstream. Yeah. Compared to 10 years ago, again, like it's definitely going in the right direction, I would say. Yeah.
So now the next thing is that we will get some questions from the public. I don't know if we have the microphone ready. Stijn is ready. He will go through the audience. Oh, that's really nice. DMN.
I thought you were going to ask it already, but who do you think?
Who are you? You gotta introduce yourself as well.
I'm Mark, Bitcoiner, 2015. Who's your most likely suspect to be Satoshi Nakamoto?
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm getting that question every time I talk about the book. It shifts around, honestly. I've had different main candidates. Several of them are in the book. But all of them have this one reason why they're probably not it as well. So I am kind of at a loss. Like, I really don't know. I mean, you know, you can probably think of some of the usual suspects, and I've considered them usual suspects as well, but I really don't. I don't have the answer. I just don't know. Satoshi did a good job hiding his raw identity.
Of course you don't know. Nobody knows. But who is your most likely suspect?
I would rather not say, I think. Yeah, I don't want to put anyone like, I don't want to cast any, I also don't like doxing people, but also I just don't know. But I don't even really like putting people under that spotlight or, so yeah, I'm just gonna leave that at, maybe after the cameras are off, I'll be willing to tell you. If you give me another beer or two.
Well, I had a beer. I'm Stefan. I think Satoshi Nakamoto is the only example of privacy in Bitcoin. Maybe that's a blunt statement. But you can do maybe Lightning Network, you can do maybe mixing, you can maybe do Coinbase rewards, whatever, you know. But basically, it's all about transparency. I was talking to a guy, I won't mention who he is, but he was talking about the advantages of transparency. I'm talking corruption, I'm talking fraud, I'm talking seeing what's actually happening. What do you think about the tension between privacy on the one side and transparency on the other side?
As a general rule, I do think it's probably good if you know, our elected representatives, authorities, if they provide the transparency that we're looking for. So if they account for their finances, and it's kind of cool that Bitcoin also allows that. However, for me, privacy is a much bigger and more important issue, and that's really at risk nowadays with electronic payment systems that are being rolled out, and that's what we risk losing. So I do think that's where the main focus for Bitcoin should be. And it's a work in progress. This is also something I write in my book. I don't, like when Satoshi left, he didn't leave a finished protocol, I think. It still needed to be finished. It still needed to be improved. And privacy is one of the key features of Bitcoin that was not perfect when Satoshi left, and that should be improved. The other being scalability. This is also like what some of the early email responses to Satoshi addressed these topics. And yeah, Bitcoin is a work in progress that we should, you know, we should try to improve these aspects in particular.
Thank you.
What do you think about taxing Bitcoin like they do in the US?
They tax Bitcoin here as well, right? What do I think about taxing Bitcoin? I don't like it.
Because then it won't be private anymore. Huh?
Oh, well, I mean, the day that the tax authorities would ask, you know, everyone to sort of submit their public keys, that will be a very strong incentive to get out of here. But I mean, not just for the tax reason, but also for the privacy reason. Like, that's a very scary idea that we could get to that point potentially. Yeah, what can I say? Bitcoin is a work in progress, and we gotta do our best to prevent that kind of future for Bitcoin.
Hey Aaron, my name is Matthijs. About Satoshi again, do you think in the future we might find out who Satoshi is, or are there any loose ends?
I would say it would get harder over time, right? Like whatever traces he might have left would probably data rot over time as well. The counter argument might be that more and more people will try to figure it out and will try to look at like weird places to find some sort of evidence. Like I don't know if you saw Jameson Lopp's recent presentation proving that Finney is not Satoshi. Like he went into data relating to his running app on his phone, and he figured that Finney was running at the same time that Satoshi was posting, so you know that sort of proves the Finney. Also, there were photos of the race. Like this is very fringe stuff, like very Jameson Loppian to find this kind of stuff. But you know, maybe there will be James Lops in the future that will take the opposite approach and sort of find more and more fringe stuff to try to demask Satoshi. But yeah, on the other hand, whatever traces are left will probably also be deleted over time, disappear, data rot. So I'm not expecting. I mean, maybe at one point he'll, demask himself. Of course, that's possible. But I'm really, even that is getting hard, because at this point, how do you even prove that you are Satoshi? Like you could, but these could be the keys could be stolen. It could be his emails were hacked. So it's getting harder and harder to even prove it in a positive way that you're Satoshi, I would say.
Do you also know, or other people here, that in 2038 there is going to be a problem with all computer-based systems because of the timing in minutes was started in 1970, and in 2038 those minutes are gone to the max. So we have to find another solution, and will definitely do something with Ether and other coins.
I don't think the year is 2038. I think it's further. It's more like 21 something. But in general, this is what I was saying earlier. I don't believe Satoshi left a finished product. He left a working product, but he left alpha software basically, and we do all need to keep improving it and working on it. And one of the important things is that Satoshi left, which is where my book ends. So there's no single person, no single entity that gets to decide these things. We got to figure it out together. But Bitcoin is not a finished product. We got to improve it, and we got to fix bugs, and it's a living, breathing project. So this sort of is part of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey Aaron.
Hey Patrick.
You've interviewed quite some people. What would you say was like the most remarkable thing that you discovered while interviewing all those people for your book?
That's a good question. Let's see.
Second best is also okay.
Yeah, Richard Stallman was interesting. I found it very interesting, both how open he is to answering questions and to sort of being available, and at the same time how strongly he feels about some things. Like I used the term free and open source software in my book, and he really didn't like that because he thinks it should be free/libre open source software. That's sort of the term he prefers. But he's great. He's a very interesting figure. But I think your question is more about the most interesting insight. Well, I'll be honest. I did a lot of research before interviewing anyone. Oh, maybe an interesting answer is what happened with Chaum and his company, because there's a lot of disagreement there. Even to this day, why DigiCash didn't succeed. And so basically, there's some former employees feel very strongly that Chaum messed it up, that he was a great cryptographer and a great person, but a horrible businessman. And that's why DigiCash never succeeded. But then Chaum himself and also some other former employees, probably a minority though, but at least some other employees, think that the problem was there was just no market for it. It was not Chaum's fault at all. Personally, I think it's probably both. That's my best guess. He probably wasn't a great businessman. It's probably not where his skills were, but also there was just no market for digital cash at this time. But yeah, that was an interesting sort of sub.
Is he still living in the Netherlands or not?
No, Dave Chaum's not living in the Netherlands, no. He's back in California, I think. Yeah, as far as I know. But yeah, there's definitely, to this day, strong disagreements of what went wrong, and it's still a sensitive topic for a lot of these guys. Like they had, you gotta imagine these guys had. It seemed like such a promising startup to not just to them, but to sort of the tech world in general. Like everyone was sort of looking at DigiCash and the potential of DigiCash, and this was sort of the next big thing. It was the next Netscape. It was the next, like it had all these potential, and then they had a lot of interest as well. They had interest from big companies, Microsoft, the big Dutch banks, ING, Rabobank, I think, right? You read it more recently than I have, actually. But yeah, and also Visa. Like they had all these interests from all these big companies, and it just went nowhere. And so these guys that work there still feel like that was a really big missed opportunity, and there's still very strong disagreements on why it didn't live up to the expectation.
Thanks.
Another question. What do you think about the more, how do I say it, schizo theories about the origin of Bitcoin? That there's, I didn't read your book yet, but that there's a U.S. government behind this. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter really, right? It's like Bitcoin is free and open source software. It's math. No one cares who came up with Pi. No one needs to care who came up with Bitcoin. It's basically completely irrelevant, with the potential exception of maybe Satoshi mined a bunch of coins in the early days. But I'm not worried about that. I think whoever Satoshi is, even if it is the American government, even if it is the NSA, then they deserve it. They created it. So I'm not worried about that, and I also have no reason to think it was them. I mean, sure, there are some hints that point in that direction, like whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was very good at keeping his identity hidden. Well, the NSA would probably be pretty good at keeping their identity hidden. So, you know, that's a hint. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's actually quite long list of people that could have potentially been Satoshi Nakamoto, just based on the amount of people that were writing on the mailing list about these kinds of topics. Could have been a lot of people.
Isn't it that this book that you wrote just is the basis of really showing that this was not done by the NSA or CIA, because it's a progress of all these little parts that came together into what Bitcoin is, and all this previous work that had been done in public is actually molded together into one thing. So you see that all this work that was done in public, that's not by an agency, because it was done in public. And that's basically what this book proves, I think, in that sense. I
mean, the NSA could have still puzzled the different pieces together, right? There's cryptographers working at the NSA as well, mostly, in fact. So, you know, I'm sure that there were NSA people on that mailing list just to keep up with what other people were coming up with and what they were discovering that the NSA was doing, for example. So sure, it could have been, but it could have been anyone, so there's no specific reason to think it was the NSA, I would argue. And even if it was, I don't think it's a problem. That's still, thanks NSA, you did something great for a change. I mean, they probably did more. They probably stopped some actual terrorists maybe at some point. So maybe it wasn't the first great thing they did, but.
Okay, last question, I think.
Yes, great, because I have to go to the bathroom, and I don't think there's only one.
A lot of people want something to drink also. So.
There's only one. My name is Peter. I'm working together with Stijn, amongst others, and Bert and Peter Slachter on Bitcoin Alpha. Because I can't code, I can't do anything with legal, and Bert always says there are three things important for mass adoption. It's the technique, it's legal, and it's education. I guess your part is also the education part, isn't it? And how important is that according to you? As opposed to the other two.
So I think it's very important, and this is for the same reason that I mentioned earlier, like the Helvini reason, so to say, that I believe that the only way we're gonna get, you know, a society that we want, so that for me would include a society that offers privacy to people and also that's not socialist essentially, the only way to get there is to explain to people why that's a society, or more general, more Bitcoin specific, a society where money is fair. The only way we can get there is if we explain to people why that's important. And I think education is a part of that. So I think that's very important.
So I can imagine your book came out this year, but I can imagine it will be more popular in 5 years because many more people know about Bitcoin and want to know about its beginning.
Well, yeah, the nice thing about my book is that it doesn't have an expiration date, really, because it doesn't, like, it's not about current Bitcoin, it's about what happened before Bitcoin, and what happened before Bitcoin is not going to change. Now, the only potential expiration date is if Satoshi Nakamoto does reveal himself. Like, then my book is going to feel a little bit stale at that point, probably. Especially if he writes his own book about where Bitcoin came from. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I can compete with that necessarily. But other than that, yeah, I do think, hopefully my book sort of has this evergreen aspect to it that in 10 years it's sort of as relevant as it is today. Or even more relevant, as you suggest, yeah.
Can we get a copy tonight, or do we have to?
No, I'm still waiting for my own copy. I ordered it. I ordered it on Amazon. I hope when I get back... When I get back, it's hopefully in my mailbox, but I don't have anything.
Yeah, so this is a nice bridge to what I've actually...
I have this one, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll read a little bit of what I put in the cover. I printed a special cover for Aaron. In the pages of this meticulously crafted volume, witness the tangible embodiment of Aaron's relentless journey. Through the intricacies of blood, sweat and tears, he delves into the minds of countless cypherpunks and other visionaries, capturing their insights that paved the way for the remarkable genesis of Bitcoin. Aaron's unyielding commitment and unwavering passion for freedom technology served as the anchor that kept the flame of motivation burning bright. The first-hand accounts and invaluable perspectives shared by the contributors to Bitcoin contained within these pages will undoubtedly leave an indelible mark on generations to come. It is with great pride that I present this labor of love to you, a testament to your tireless efforts. Thank you for your enduring contributions to the world of Bitcoin. May you continue to shape its future with your brilliance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take the cover off. This is it, the hand binded.
Yeah, heel mooi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And please, can I also get a hand for Bert, who does so much for the Dutch community?